Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear viewers, brothers and sisters of IQRA TV. I hope you found the first part of this discussion with Dee Collins, the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, interesting, illuminating, and I know there are lots of questions that one could ask Dee, and I think we'll have to ask her to come back at some stage when we can sort of meet diaries again, because there must be lots of issues that people want to raise at some stage. Sometimes, we normally have this live, so we have a phone in as well.
Right,
but
okay.
obviously we're having to do this, in a different format today, because we've got football following up. So I hope our viewers are going to be glued after this program to IQRA TV and watch the football as well, and you support the England team. Dee, we were talking about the disposals.
Yes.
Where the information is coming out that 20% of the cases that people report actually end up in the criminal justice system, through the courts, through the CPS. 80% don't. Now I know there's lots of reasons behind that. Can you sort of just explain very briefly what the reasons could be?
Okay, so the first set of circumstances is that I want to explain to everybody is, if you make a report to us of a hate crime, we do deal with it seriously. It is not one of those crimes that we consider to be low level. We consider it to be very serious, and it will always have an investigation. The challenge comes when either the individual who is unfortunately the victim of this hate crime can't give us any further information. So that obviously presents some difficulties about being able to actually find who the suspect is and how to deal with it. That's one set of circumstances. The second set of circumstances is quite often the victim does actually know the suspect and fundamentally wants that behaviour to stop. And what better way than some kind of educational process rather than something that's necessarily punitive. And with the victims agreement, we can do things like appropriate cautioning. You talked about restorative justice, which can be anything from a meeting between the victim and the suspect and a conversation to take place and an apology, to a written letter, to some kind of restorative practice, to maybe going and doing something in the community to make amends. But that's always with the victim's agreement.
Right.
And quite often that's actually what the victim wants, rather than waiting for months and months and months perhaps for a court process, where all sorts of things might have happened in between, life might have moved on. So I actually think that's a really successful way of getting a very swift outcome for the victim and some kind of recompense and a recognition of the impact that that behaviour has then had on the victim on behalf of the suspect. Because at the end of the day, we want that behaviour to stop and for them to not go on and do that to somebody else. Right. And that's why I think sometimes restorative justice is a very, very useful and powerful way. If, of course, the behaviour is completely and utterly extreme and needs dealing with through the courts, then that's what we also do.
Right. I mean, thank you for that explanation. I understand that people may be sceptical about restorative justice because it's something fairly new for lots of people.
I understand.
And until they see the outcomes of the restorative justice program, which is not universal at this moment in time.
No.
It's not practiced everywhere. But, obviously it is one way forward. But I think the key issue here is that it's the victim's wishes and desire, and everything's done in partnership with the victim themselves. I mean, coming back to hate crime, obviously, as I say, I'm involved hate crime on a national level. We have seen over the last couple of years, and particularly in the last 12 months or so, hate crime has really shot up, particularly hate crime around Islamophobia, and also disability hate crime. And on a national level, we're really concerned. 35% of hate crime, religious hate crime, went up in the last 12 months, and then in this part of the world as well. Are you doing anything proactive around hate crime? You talked about hate crime is a priority. You deal with it seriously. What are you doing? Anything more proactive in terms of dealing with hate crime in this particular region?
So there's a couple of things that we've been doing. The first is encouraging people to come and report matters to us so that I then know where to best direct my resources to try and stop things from happening in the first place. The second is we've been, with the Police and Crime Commissioner's support, running a Hate Hurts campaign throughout the last 12 months, again trying to explain to people the impact that their behaviour can have on others and how it needs to stop. And secondly, again, to inform people about the consequences of what could happen to you if you become somebody who gets embroiled in some kind of hate crime, maybe be encouraged by somebody else. Right. The third thing that we try and do is go out and actually talk to communities about what would make a difference for them. So we've got a really, really strong network now right across different faiths, as well as the Muslim faith, to try and offer support, advice, guidance, anything that we can do to try and prevent matters from taking place in the first place. And then of course community feedback's really important to us about how people are feeling, where people think that we may have let them down and what we can learn from that.
In terms of community feedback, I mean, I know the CPS has got scrutiny panels, for example, you know, where
Yes.
they go through the cases.
Yes.
You know, they forensically go through them and look at them and say, you know,
Yeah.
have they done this properly? How do the community feedback to you? You know, do you have a consultative sort of arrangement or something like that?
Yeah.
You know, if anybody wants to get involved in that, how can they get about doing it?
So earlier on you mentioned being a member of the advisory group from an independent point of view. So we run independent advisory groups for all of our 5 policing areas covering West Yorkshire.
Right. So this is each of the districts?
Yes, and then we also have a force IAG as well.
Right.
And again, there are also other scrutiny panels that are operated via the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office.
Right.
Each policing area also has a hate crime scrutiny panel.
Right.
And what they do is they will look at individual cases, have a look at what police action has or hasn't taken place, and then give their views about whether they feel that that's appropriate. And again, what can we learn from those?
Right.
The feedback that we get from those scrutiny panels is pretty positive on the whole, but again, many of my workforce are relatively young and inexperienced and sometimes don't always get things right. And so it's really important that we give that feedback to the individuals about how to improve and also to make sure that what they're doing is correct procedurally as well.
Right. So if somebody wants to approach the IAG, the independent advisory groups or the advisory groups at the district level, are they? Where's the information available? Is it available?
Information's available on the
website?
On the Force website. Have a look at also at the Police and Crime Commissioner's website because there's information on there as well. There are a number of different scrutiny groups that people can get involved with. Really encourage the young people that may be watching today, because we also have a youth IAG that the Police and Crime Commission oversees.
Youth IAG, Independent Advisory Group.
And again, you know, we want to make sure that people's voices are
heard.
heard.
You've got a diverse group of people on there,
Absolutely.
reflecting all the communities that, you know, make up the
Yes.
glorious West Yorkshire that we have here.
Yes, and you know, willing volunteers who want to come and help and support and improve policing. And there's no better way than actually hearing directly from members of the community about things that are troubling them, things that they want to know about.
If they come up with a situation where they feel that the police have not followed procedure,
yes,
and not dealt with somebody's complaint properly, what sanctions do you have, either against the people who are dealing with it or other sanctions?
So obviously every single member of the public is afforded the opportunity to formally complain about how they feel that they've been dealt with and treated, and that matter will be recorded in every occasion, and then we will assess it to determine what the best way forward is in terms of an investigation, or perhaps they just might want the officer or member of staff speaking to and giving some advice. Again, it's very much victim-led.
Right. In terms of training, for example, of the police service, I mean, I know this is a huge issue. How is training structured? I mean, in the old days, I know there was all sorts of different structures. I used to go to Brams Hill to do command force training as well, every now and then for the senior command post. But in the old days, in the 70s and the 80s, you had in-house training courses around racism awareness, anti-racism, etc.
Yeah.
You know, there was all sorts of arguments for and against them. How is that still done on a local basis at the force level, or is it all now national?
So the majority of the training that's delivered at the moment is very much dependent on local demographics. So here in West Yorkshire, because we've got such a massively diverse community, we develop our own training packages. So for example, if you join the organisation today, part of your initial induction will be about understanding differences in community, what different community needs are. We will then probably, as you start to develop through your training and get posted to your particular policing area, then give some further background training as to what the local community makeup is. So for example, here in Bradford, we would really encourage new recruits and indeed existing officers, particularly in neighbourhood policing teams, to go on one of our faith trails. I've been on it myself. It was absolutely fascinating.
Is that where you visit places of worship and things like that?
We visit places of worship, we share our thoughts and ask questions, we understand some of the rituals and culture, because clearly that's really, really important for us, particularly when attending incidents. And then that ongoing training, that the one-to-one with your tutor constable and then others that you might work alongside. We've also got, as I said, those internal staff support networks who are more than happy to provide advice around specific communities and what issues to think about. And we also have quite recently an app on our mobile handheld devices that you will see people carrying, which again provides additional information for people when they're attending different incidents in different communities. Right. So there's quite a lot of training ongoing, but of course you can never do enough training.
I'm sure you can. I mean, obviously there's a huge issue around training and training police officers as well as civilian staff. You know, because they're the backbone of the organisation as well.
Yep.
And I know there's some work going on call handler training at the moment,
yes,
on a national level. You know, the National Police Chiefs Council are doing, or putting some guidance together, because that was mentioned as well at the meeting. But a lot of, I mean, one of the things around race and diversity training has been that not all communities are homogeneous, and obviously, so like you said, there are different communities that make up the black and minority ethnic community, and they all have their own different idiosyncratic sort of issues. You know, if I put it that in a humorous way, how do you make sure that the training is reflective? That, you know, do you bring people from outside to come and talk to people and give them advice and guidance or information rather than anything else? So is that something that you do on a regular basis?
We try and encourage that local connectivity. So once you know where you are going to be working, which community you're going to be working with, it's really important to get to actually know what's taking place. Not necessarily on the West Yorkshire Police basis that I need to know about, but what's taking place for you locally. And again, it's going to vary about what works. So we might go to particular community groups, we might have a focus group, we might get somebody in to come and speak to a number of officers and staff members. It's going to vary all of the time. What we do try and do from time to time is get some outside views of what we're doing, and again through the advisory group, or indeed some other expertise, to come and just check and make sure that what we're doing is appropriate, is current, is relevant to communities, so that we're not actually delivering training that might be 5, 6, 7 years old. We're as current as we possibly can be. That's where I think the new national strategy around diversity and the new toolkit's going to be particularly helpful, because again, what that does is bring together what's good practice across the country, and these are things that are seen to work in different communities. Maybe you might want to try some of these, and there are always going to be 1 or 2 areas that we hadn't necessarily thought of.
Okay. I mean, in terms of, I mean, you go around the communities, as you say, you meet different people, but you obviously meet people at the higher level. You know, you senior members of the community, senior members of the, you know, institutional organisations. How much intelligence do you get back from young people about their perception of the police service, their views of the police service? And, you know, is there a sort of a difference between what older people understand? And, you know, we know from past work, and we know that older people's, you know, understanding and perception of the police service is sometimes quite different to how young people perceive it. Now, do you do any sort of real engagement work with young people through some of the youth groups, some of the other organisations? Because I'm sure, as in the Muslim community, for example, the older people have a very different view to what the young people, you know, perceive the police service to be. Do you get that feedback, and how do you do it?
I do. I get out to meet as many different people within communities as I can. I obviously get feedback through the networks that I've also got internally within my own organisation. I attend a variety of different events. I don't always speak to the more senior stakeholders as you referred them to. I do try and get out and talk to different people and seize opportunities when they present themselves, to be perfectly honest with you. So it's not that long ago, for example, that I met a lot of Muslim mothers and talked to them about their aspirations for their families. As wide a variety of people as you can possibly speak to. The reality, though, sometimes is that when some younger people are talking to me as a senior police officer, that doesn't necessarily always make the easiest of conversations from both perspectives. So we have to find something in common, some common ground. I've got to say, this is where somebody like my niece comes in really, really handy, because she's a young person. She will tell me about the latest things to talk about, some of the ways that people communicate through social media, for example. And so it's only in the last couple of years that we've really engaged in social media from a West Yorkshire Police perspective, because not only does that appeal to a complete cross-section of people, what we're then finding is that by listening to some of the feedback, particularly around things like our cadet scheme, we can find better ways of engaging with young people by using young people ambassadors ourselves. So we're trying to do different things to try and get young people's views heard.
I mean, obviously, you know, we're an Islamic channel, IQRA TV. The majority of our audience are Muslim, not exclusively Muslim. Islamophobia is a huge issue.
Yes, it is.
We have seen in the last 2 or 3 years a huge spike in anti-Muslim hate crime, you know, and it's been a real concern, particularly for women from the Muslim community who wear the hijab and the niqab. You know, they've been the front line of, you know, the forefront of being victims. Now, you know, I was looking for some statistics today to see what the situation is in West Yorkshire, and I couldn't find it because I couldn't get hold of my friend Paul Gianassi, who is the government's lead on the hate crime strategy in this country. We used to have a table which used to list all the police forces, you know, and around all the characteristics, you know, race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, etc. But I couldn't find that information. How is it, in your view, in West Yorkshire, for Muslim communities? I mean, we've been very fortunate that we've not had attacks on institutions so far, as we have in other parts of the country, except the one that took place in Leeds, with the mosque and the Gurudwara was attacked at the same time by some mindless people. And I think there was some in other parts of West Yorkshire as well, but minor incidents. Obviously, Islamophobia is of huge concern to many, many people.
Yes.
And we have a very large Muslim community. Are you taking any specific action around Islamophobia and tackling Islamophobia? And, you know, where women, I mean, when we had the Punish a Muslim Day, a lot of people were, you know, Paul was here, by the way, the day before, and we, you know, we did an interview. It was run the day before the Punish a Muslim Day. Fortunately, nothing major happened, you know, and we were very lucky. But that actually put the frighteners in a lot of people. You know, a lot of people saying, don't go out, don't, you know, put yourself at risk. What does the West Yorkshire Police Force do to try and reassure people when something, you know, when people have this perception? I mean, that was a, you know, one-off day that people wanted to. But day-to-day lives, we've seen, you know, this enormous amount of statistics that show that Islamophobia is on the rise, and particularly after, you know, Brexit, for example, and God forbid after football as well. Sometimes we see domestic violence go up. You know, and let's hope England win, because we've seen in the past that when England do lose, or your own football team loses, domestic violence figures goes up, well, regrettably. What have you done anything in particular that, you know, reassures people, communities, etc., that, you know, you're on top of this?
So communication is the key here, isn't it, and engagement with people, and trying to reassure people about the fact that, thankfully, and I will say thankfully, the incidences here of Islamophobia that have been reported to us, and I accept that there's going to be some underreporting, have been lower than in other parts of the country. I take that as a real strong sign of what a close-knit community we have here in West Yorkshire, and real supportive people wanting to make sure that we don't either respond to these idiots, as you call them, I would call them offenders, who absolutely go out to try and create as much disharmony amongst communities as possible. That's just not acceptable. So first and foremost, anything in terms of faith or hate crime is dealt with very, very robustly. That's the first message. The second thing, you mentioned actually the Punish the Muslim letters, which was absolutely disgraceful. As you know, there is now somebody who's been charged, so the case is sub judice. But what we did do here in West Yorkshire through our counter-terrorism unit is we led on that investigation nationally. So it was my officers and staff that did their very best to try and go out there and find the offender and deal with it, to try and put people's minds at rest. The communication is the key, so going out and talking with communities, getting our community ambassadors to also reassure communities, because I think that's really important. Making sure that our neighbourhood teams are sharing the message of, look, we're here, we can support you, if you've got any concerns, let us know, we can do what we can. It's very, very difficult though, isn't it, when those perceptions are out in communities, as you've already made reference to,
yes,
to try and calm things down as best we can. Just to make your reference to football, I actually think our football team have done incredibly well.
Oh, definitely.
What wonderful ambassadors of
Yes.
young people they are. I don't see any egos in that team. They're working really, really closely
True.
together. And that's what I want to see here in West Yorkshire. This is about the greater good and working together, not our own individual aspirations and ambitions. Surely this is about by being really, really close and being caring and considerate of one another, valuing our differences, that we can make a huge difference together.
Right. Thank you for the answer, and I agree with you. I think, you know, there is obviously some good cooperative working going on, but, you know, obviously in times like these, people do have some anxieties.
I understand that entirely.
You know, and I know we've got the EDL coming in Wakefield. Is it next week here?
They've just been on, well, they've just been over on Saturday.
On Saturday, yes.
And the community response was tremendous.
How, I mean, obviously, you know, this is a challenge for our people as well. You know,
Of
people
course.
want to respond, want to show their, you know, abhorrence, for example, when the EDL and you know, such like come. How do you think people should respond? Should they confront them, or should they stay away from them and not give them the oxygen, you know, the publicity oxygen that they're looking for?
So the difficulty we have from a policing point of view is the fact that we live in a country that allows freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
And so the demonstrations that take place, the conversations that take place, have to take place within a democratic society. And I think everybody understands that.
Yes.
I think the community response when people disagree with the views of others, where, as you say, they don't give them the oxygen, that they act with absolute dignified silence, is absolutely the best way forward. Now, I know sometimes that can be very difficult, particularly when you feel that some of the views that are being expressed are completely inappropriate. But to do that in a dignified way, to be able to perhaps do things quietly and calmly, not in the full glare of that media publicity, is absolutely the best way forward. And I think the community here do that in an incredibly careful, considered and supportive way. And of course what that then does is it means that people aren't getting the oxygen, the airtime, the airspace that perhaps they want to express some very extreme views. And I think that's important that we do work together, and that the policing of these issues is careful but robust where it needs to be. And that's what we have been doing over the last few weeks. Well,
thank you very much. I think it's a very good answer there. I mean, there's a lot of issues that we want to cover. We're coming to the end of the program. I'm really grateful, Dee, for you to come here. I know it's taken some time. I hope the next time round it's not going to be that long. I hope you found this experience not too daunting, that you'd want to come back again.
Thank you.
I can't guarantee that it's going to be as pleasant or as easy for you next time. But as a starter, I hope Dee's presence here, the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, she's given us some reassurances that in her role as the Chief Constable, the most senior police officer in the county of West Yorkshire, she is committed to making sure that hate crime is dealt with effectively and as robustly as possible. We should all report hate crime, you know, regardless of what, you know, where it comes from. Make sure that, you know, there's 2 or 3 ways of reporting it. You can either ring the 101 number or the 999 if it's an emergency, if your life is at threat or, you know, a serious incident, or you can report it through True Vision, which is an online website that the government has set up, which I was party to when it was set up. So, you know, there's many ways of doing it. There's also third-party reporting centres as well, which we've not had time to talk about. And the third-party reporting centres are through Tell Mama, MEND, etc. And there are many, many other organisations, institutions within West Yorkshire who are signed up to be third-party reporting centres. If you're the victim, they'll assist you in reporting. Do you want to?
And you can also report online, which is perhaps the swiftest way of being able to get hold of us, which is click before you call.
Click before you call.
Click before you call. And that's a great way of being able to report things as well, particularly if you don't necessarily want to speak to somebody on the other end of a phone.
Okay, there you go. Thank you very much, Dee. Thank you for coming. Friends, I hope you found today's programme interesting, informative, that, you know, something you've learned. I've certainly learned quite a lot today from Dee, and inshallah one day we'll bring her back, God willing, and we'll have another conversation. May Allah be with you. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Inshallah, I'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.